In late January of 1974, Elias Boone died in his sleep on a quiet Monday night. He was 73. For more than 40 years, he had worked the same 280 acres in north central Missouri, and almost no one outside his county knew his name. It wasn't the kind of farm people talked about. No new barns, no flashy equipment, no expansion loans. Just pasture, hay, a few crop sections, and a man who believed land should be understood before it was pushed. Elias wasn't poor, but he had never tried to get rich fast. He also had a habit people noticed and quietly dismissed. After every heavy rain, after every thaw, Elias would put on his boots and walk the land. Not ride it, walk it. Fence line to fence line, low ground to high ground. He never explained why. Most assumed it meant nothing. They were wrong. When he died, what he left behind looked ordinary. A wife, Helen, a son, Martin, 34, already working the farm, a daughter who had moved away, an aging tractor, a small savings account, and land that had never failed but never impressed anyone either. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 4 days after the funeral, Helen was putting away an old agricultural yearbook Elias had kept for years. When she lifted it, something folded slipped out and fell to the floor. She picked it up, carried it to the kitchen table, and opened it. It was a map of the farm. Hand-drawn, pencil, old paper. Property lines, fences, the house, the pasture, everything laid out simply. But that wasn't what made her stop. The map was covered in notes, dozens of them. Small, careful handwriting, dates beside each one. 1936, 1948, 1959, 1972. She started reading. Water stands here 2 days after April rain. Ground stays cold after sun. Grass thicker than south side. Stone shows after wash. These weren't random thoughts, they were patterns. Elias hadn't been writing a diary, he had been tracking something. When Martin came in from the barn, Helen didn't explain. She just turned the paper toward him. He leaned over the table and froze. Martin knew every acre of that farm. He knew where mud held longest, where cattle drifted, where grass came in uneven. But he had never seen this. Did he ever show you this? Helen asked. Martin shook his head slowly. No. His eyes kept moving across the page until they stopped. At the north edge of the property, in a place no one paid much attention to, Elias had drawn a circle, then another circle around it, and in the center, a mark. Next to it were 3 words, break here, cold flow. Martin read it once, then again. What does that even mean? He asked. Helen didn't answer. She couldn't. Around that marked spot, the notes grew denser. Moisture that stayed longer, grass that grew differently, stone beneath the surface. Alone, none of it meant much. Together, it felt deliberate. Martin straightened up slowly. He's been doing this for years. He paused, then corrected himself. Not years, decades. And in that moment, something shifted. Not grief, not confusion, instruction. His father had never explained what he was doing out there after every storm, never called attention to it, never said, this matters. He had just kept walking, watching, recording. 40 years of it compressed into one sheet of paper. Martin looked back down at the words. Break here, cold flow. For the first time since the funeral, he realized something important. His father hadn't left him answers. He had left him a place to start digging. To understand why those 3 words mattered, you have to understand water in that part of Missouri in the 1970s. Most farmers didn't go looking for hidden sources. They drilled. Deep wells, electric pumps, pressure tanks, pipes running out to pasture and barns. It was expensive, but it was reliable. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. The man pushing that system hardest around Grundy County was Vernon Pike. He sold equipment, arranged drilling crews, knew exactly how to make the numbers sound right. And not long after Elias Boone was buried, he started calling on Martin. "Martin," he said one morning, leaning against the truck, "you're running that place now. You can't do it the old way forever. Drill a well, do it right. One setup, and you're covered for the next 20 years. Martin didn't answer right away. He was still thinking about the map. "My father never drilled," he said. Vernon shrugged. "Your father didn't like spending money. He liked knowing where it went." That got a small smile, but it didn't change the pitch. "Listen," Vernon continued, "we go down about 200 feet, hit a stable layer, set the pump, hook the tank. You're looking at real pressure, steady flow. No guessing, no waiting on rain. It'll pay for itself." Martin hesitated, then said something he hadn't planned to say. "My father left me something." Vernon raised an eyebrow. "Yeah?" "A map." The word landed wrong, not serious, not technical, just strange. "A map," Vernon repeated. "What kind of map?" "Of the farm. He marked a place. Says that's where I should break ground." Vernon let out a short breath, not quite a laugh, but close. "Martin," he said carefully, "I'm offering you a drilled well with a known depth, known output, known cost. And you're talking about digging because of a pencil mark? It's not just a mark. It's still paper." That conversation didn't stay between them. By the end of the week, it had moved through the feed store, the co-op, the gas station, and by Saturday morning, it had a name. Boone's Treasure Map. Where's the X? What's he going to find out there? Gold? Oil? Buried cash from the Depression? No one was cruel about it, but no one took it seriously either. In a small town, you don't have to be mocked loudly to feel it. Martin heard all of it. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself, didn't bring the map out to prove anything. He just went to the north edge of the property and started digging. Early April, frost gone, ground workable. He brought a shovel, a pick, a steel rod, a short-handled sledge. No machines. If his father had marked that spot by hand, Martin was going to open it the same way. The first 2 feet were easy, dark topsoil, rich, root-heavy, effect from pasture that had been left alone long enough to build itself back up. At 3 feet, the color changed. Lighter soil, more sand, small gravel, still normal. At 4 feet, the shovel hit resistance. Not rock, clay. Dense, blue-gray, slick enough to make the blade slide if he didn't angle it right. Martin switched to the pick. It took time. That layer didn't want to move. But eventually, it gave way. And beneath it, the ground changed again. At 5 feet, the shovel struck something solid, flat, clean, unmistakable. Martin stopped, knelt down, brushed the surface clear with his hand. Limestone. He sat back on his heels for a moment, breathing slow, because suddenly the map wasn't abstract anymore. Stone shows after wash. His father had written that years ago, and now Martin was looking straight at it. Late that afternoon, Vernon drove past the property again. He slowed when he saw the open pit. rolled down the window. "Find anything yet?" he called out. Martin stood at the bottom of the hole, dirt on his hands, shirt dark with sweat. He looked up, then back down at the stone. "I think I'm getting close," he said. Vernon shook his head slightly. "Hope so," he replied, "because right now all I see is a man digging into rock." Martin didn't answer. He waited until the truck pulled away. Then he crouched back down and ran his hand across the surface again. Because if his father had spent 40 years watching this land, this wasn't the end of the map. It was the beginning. Martin went back out the next morning before the sun had fully cleared the trees. The field was quiet, no wind, just the sound of his boots settling into the softened ground around the pit. He climbed down and stood over the limestone. If Vernon had been right, this was the end. If his father had been right, this was the start of something buried just beneath it. Martin picked up the steel rod and tapped the surface. Once. Twice. Most of the stone answered with a hard, solid tone, but not all of it. There was a section, slightly off center, where the sound changed. Subtle. Hollow enough to notice if you were listening for it. He tapped again. Same sound. Different ground under the same rock. Martin set the rod down and grabbed the pick. He didn't swing hard. He chipped. Careful. Controlled. Breaking only what needed to be broken. The limestone didn't shatter. It gave in pieces. Thin flakes. Edges soft from years underground. He worked slowly. Minutes passed. Then more. Until a line began to appear. Not drawn. Not clean. A natural split. A narrow fracture running through the stone, angled the same direction his father had marked years before. Martin crouched lower, cleared the dust, pressed his fingers into the gap. It went deeper than the surface, much deeper. He slid the steel rod into it. It sank without resistance. No solid rock beneath. No stop. Just space. Martin pulled it back out, stared at the opening, then leaned closer. The air coming out of the crack felt cold. Not like morning air, colder, steady. He didn't move for a moment. Then he widened the opening just enough to see inside. Another chip. Another. Careful. And then something changed. The dust along the edge darkened. A thin line of moisture appeared where dry stone had been seconds before. Martin froze, watched. The line thickened, then gathered, then moved. Water. Not pouring, not rushing, rising. It seeped from the fracture slowly, steadily, as if it had been waiting behind that stone for years. Martin leaned back, one hand braced against the dirt wall of the pit. He didn't say a word, didn't call out, didn't run. He just watched, minute by minute. The bottom of the pit began to fill. First a sheen, then a shallow pool, then enough to reflect the pale sky above him. He reached down and put his hand in it. Cold, deep cold, the kind that doesn't come from rain sitting on the surface, but from something that's traveled underground a long time. He lifted his hand, let the water run across his fingers. Clear, no sediment, no cloud. Then he cupped it and drank. It was clean, not just drinkable, clean, with a faint mineral edge, like it had been filtered through stone long before it reached him. Martin sat there for a long time. about pipes, not thinking about cost, not thinking about Vernon. Just one thing. His father had known. Not guessed, not hoped, known. The notes on the map started lining up in his head. Ground colder than it should be. Moisture that stayed longer than rain alone could explain. Grass growing thicker. Roots pulling from somewhere deeper. Stone beneath the soil. Water moving where it shouldn't. 40 years of watching. 40 years of small differences, all pointing to one place. Martin reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded map. He had been carrying it with him every day. He opened it carefully, looked at the mark. Break here, cold flow. Then he looked down at the water, still rising, still steady, still quiet. His father had stood on this ground once, seen what no one else saw, felt something in the land that didn't match the surface, and instead of explaining it, he had written 3 words, folded the paper, and left it behind. Martin folded the map again, slipped it back into his pocket, then looked back at the water filling the pit at his feet. This wasn't just a spring, it was proof. Proof that the land had been speaking the whole time, and only one man had been listening long enough to understand it. Martin didn't rush what came next. He didn't call anyone, didn't turn it into a project. He just worked the way his father would have, slow, deliberate, and with as little waste as possible. Over the next few weeks, he widened the pit just enough to stabilize it. He lined the edges with stone to keep the walls from collapsing. He cleared the fracture carefully so the flow stayed clean. Then he did something simple. He let gravity do the work. A short pipe from the spring, down a gentle slope, into a holding tank. No pump, no electricity, no noise. The water came on its own, steady, quiet, cold. Not powerful enough to irrigate the entire farm, but more than enough for what mattered daily. It filled troughs for the cattle. It fed a small cistern behind the house. And most importantly, it gave Martin something he had never truly had before: control. Because now, a portion of his land didn't depend entirely on the sky. That spring changed how he used the farm. Not all at once, but enough. Martin took about 12 acres near the lower ground and turned it into produce. Sweet corn, tomatoes, beans, melons, peppers. Crops that needed consistent water. Crops most of his neighbors avoided unless they had a full irrigation setup. He didn't have that. He had something else: free water. No monthly bill, no pump repairs, no power cost creeping higher every summer, just flow. By mid-season, you could see the difference without stepping out of a truck. Most fields that year looked fine, dry in places, uneven, dependent on when the last rain had come through. But Martin's produce patch, it held. Greener, stronger, not perfect, but alive in a way that stood out. People noticed. Of course they did. In a place where everyone watches everyone else's fields, difference doesn't stay hidden long. The first person to come back wasn't a neighbor, it was Vernon. He pulled up late one afternoon and walked down toward the spring without saying much. He stood there, hands on his hips, looking at the stone, the pipe, the water running clear into the tank. Then he looked out toward the produce rows. "How much is it giving you?" he asked. "Enough," Martin said. "All year?" "So far." Vernon nodded slowly. No sales pitch this time, no numbers, just quiet calculation. Your father found this? Martin shook his head. He marked it. I broke it open. Vernon looked back at the water. How'd he know? Martin answered without hesitation. He paid attention longer than anyone else. That answer stayed with people, more than the spring itself, because not everyone could find water like that. The land had to be right. The conditions had to line up. But the idea that the land was always showing signs, and most people just didn't notice, that spread. Some farmers started walking their fields after rain, really walking them, looking for places where water stayed too long, where ground felt colder, where grass didn't match the rest. Most found nothing like Martin Spring. A few found small seeps, enough for livestock, enough for a garden, enough to matter. But the real test came a few years later, the dry year. Summer heat held longer than usual. Rain came late, then not at all. Pumps ran longer across the county. Electric bills climbed. Fields that relied on steady draw began to show strain. Martin Spring didn't change. It didn't surge. It didn't drop. It just kept flowing. The same quiet, steady water, day after day. And that year, his produce patch did better than any season before it. While others were calculating costs, Martin wasn't. While others were watching meters, he was watching growth. No one laughed about the map anymore. No one called it a treasure map as a joke, because it had turned out to be one. Just not the kind anyone expected. The value wasn't hidden underground in gold or oil. It had been there all along, flowing, slowly, beneath the surface, waiting for someone patient enough to see it. Martin Boone worked that land for nearly 30 more years. Through wet seasons, through dry ones, through years that paid well and years that didn't. The spring never made him rich. It did something more important. It made him steady. No water bills, no rising power costs, no dependence on whether the next storm would come in time. Just a quiet source doing its job every single day. Over time, the produce patch became the most reliable part of the farm. Not the biggest, not the most impressive, but the most consistent. And consistency in farming is its own kind of wealth. The map stayed in the house. Martin had it framed the year after he found the spring, hung it in the hallway where you had to pass it every day without meaning to. Not as decoration, as a reminder. His daughter Clara grew up with it there. She would stop sometimes, trace the pencil lines with her finger, read the notes out loud. Ground stays cold, water stands, stone below. As a child, it was just something her grandfather had made. As she got older, it became something else, a pattern, a way of seeing. Clara didn't choose her field because anyone told her to. She chose it because of that map. She went to school, studied water, soil, and how land holds what you can't see from the surface. The kind of things Elias Boone had never named, but had clearly understood. Years later, when she came back to the farm, she brought tools her grandfather never had. Survey equipment, ground scans, data models. She tested the land, mapped the subsurface, measured what lay beneath the north edge where the spring had always flowed. The results surprised even the specialists. The stone layer, the fracture line, the water pocket above it, all of it aligned, almost exactly, with the marks Elias had made decades earlier. Within a margin most modern systems would consider acceptable. One of the surveyors looked at the framed map in the hallway, then back at the data and said quietly, "He didn't have instruments." Clara nodded. "No," she said, "he had time." The spring still flows, not louder, not stronger, just the same. Clara expanded it slightly over the years, built a small pond downhill to collect overflow, created a place where birds settle during migration. Her grandfather would have never called it habitat. He would have called it a pond. The map still hangs on the wall, old paper, faded pencil, 2 circles, 1 mark, 3 words: break here, cold flow. Next to it now, there's a printed survey, modern, precise, measured, and when you look at them side by side, they tell the same story. A man who walked his land long enough learned how to read it. Most people think inheritance is land, or money, or equipment. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's something harder to see. A way of paying attention, a way of waiting long enough for patterns to reveal themselves, a way of trusting what you've observed, even when no one else takes it seriously. Elias Boone never explained what he was doing. He didn't need to. He left it behind in a form that required one thing from the person who found it: belief, followed by action. Martin believed, and he dug. Clara believed, and she measured, and the land proved both of them right. The salesman had called it a treasure map once. He wasn't wrong. He just didn't understand what the treasure was. It wasn't gold. It wasn't oil. It wasn't anything you could hold in your hand. It was water, and the knowledge of where to find it. Left behind by a man who never raised his voice, but spent 40 years listening to the ground.